I lied. Okay, we're back. Recording. Okay. So there are some sensitive topics in this talk, suicidality, trauma, abuse. And if you feel like that's not something you're up for right now, even, you can come back to the recording that I just started, or just feel free to leave at any time. It's not going to offend me at all. I 100% understand that a lot of these topics can be upsetting, especially if you've lived through them. And there's a lot of trauma that comes with being undiagnosed and not being sure about your identity for a good chunk of your life. So no harm, no foul. There will be a recording, and just take care of yourself. Okay. And then we're going to start with a deep breath, because as I was writing these notes and thinking about what I wanted to talk about, I felt this pressure in my chest and this feeling in my heart. Basically, there's nothing that you need to forgive about yourself when it comes to being neurodivergent or on the spectrum, or however you identify. There's nothing here that we're going to talk about today that you should place blame on yourself for. And I felt that in my chest because I think that a lot of this, even though I didn't need to forgive myself, I did need to forgive myself to be able to move forward, because it's not a fault. So I just want everyone to take a deep breath and settle into this session together to try to get the most out of it. And not everybody's going to get the same thing out of it, but I really hope that this time we spend together gives you something. So again, if you are asking questions, you can do that in the chat to the host and panelists, or you can do it anonymous under Q&A. If anything I say pops up and you want to ask a specific question with that, feel free to do that at any time. Or if you have a question that can be at the end, we'll wait till the Q&A section. So I did take some notes based on the questions that people put into the form. So I'll try to address those. If I forget, please feel free to remind me to make sure that everybody gets their questions answered. All right, so I'm going to take a drink first, because that was a lot of talking. So we're going to go ahead and start with my journey, which is a little bit all over the place. Especially looking back now, it's kind of funny because I can see all of the signs and it makes so much sense. And I didn't find out until I was about 24, 25. So early signs, things like clothing were the biggest things. My autism shows up a lot in the sensory aspects: sound, light, texture, smells. They're all over the place. So clothing has been a lifelong struggle for me. And also seatbelts. I will have a panic attack if I'm wearing a seatbelt, which is actually something that has only changed just recently. And sometimes I can wear one and most of the time I can't. So that was one of the big catalysts for discovering that I'm on the spectrum, but we'll get there in a minute. So the very first thing that I remember is hating the seam on socks, hating it with every fiber of my soul, and throwing fits or having meltdowns, most likely, when my parents would try to put my shoes on in the morning when I was very, very young. This is still a joke among my family, but I could never not feel it. And so there were a lot of weird little things about me. I've always been a little bit strange, maybe even just eccentric. Some of that's probably the autism. The rest of it's probably just my personality. But for my parents growing up, my mom was a single mother for a while. And then she met my dad, and we started this new family unit, including grandparents, which is not something that I had a lot of contact with before. And so Christmas time came around and we're doing the gift giving part of things. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, receiving gifts can be extremely difficult if people are looking at me, because you're the center of attention and you're not sure that you can play along or act the part, which is one of the biggest things that, as you're growing up on the spectrum, especially as a woman, you learn to do. So you can get really good at it. But honestly, I still never feel convincing right now. I don't feel convincing at all. But that was a struggle. I was called a brat. People didn't understand. And, that's traumatic. At this point, I don't like receiving gifts at all, just because I don't feel like I can convincingly convey how I feel about them and what they mean to me. But when I give gifts to others, gift giving is actually my love language, funnily enough. There's so much expectation in my heart about how to get the reaction that I was trying to mimic all those years. So it's just kind of a compounding thing. There's so much, I don't even know, baggage that can come with it. And that's why it's so important that you do embrace your inner continuum. Because if not, you end up in this place where you are weighed down by every experience in your life from childhood. Someone asked in the forum about whether or not I was considered a gifted child. And in some ways, yes, I am terrible at math because I have no patience for it whatsoever. Obviously, I'm a writer now. So I was gifted in some senses and not in others. So it was more of a situation where wherever my interests were, I was always good at those things. And now the question was, how does that affect your identity now? Now there is definitely an issue with rejection. We're sitting in this time of adulthood where not everything you do is perfect, and not everybody thinks you're just this wonderful little person that they have to uplift all the time. So if you get things wrong, it can be really difficult, especially if you were raised to believe that you were special. And special is a better way to think about it than weird a lot of the time. So as you become an adult, you might end up feeling strange as opposed to interesting and creative, which can be really damaging to the life that you're trying to build for yourself. So that's definitely a difficulty that I've had to deal with, and why I'm so passionate about embracing this part of myself, and why I hope some of what I say today can help you embrace part of yourself. As I was growing up, a lot of my communication was a struggle. And so I was extremely angry all the time. And that bled into my adulthood. You're in this bubble of life that feels like it's so loud all the time, maybe, or you're anxious, or things are just constantly just like poking at you. And it feels like it never stops. And that can be so depressing, and it causes anxiety, and it's just maddening. And for a long time, up and down with the roller coaster. I can't live this way. Well, things get better for a minute, or I'm depressed. You get into these places where everything triggers you. And on top of not being understood, now you're also a ticking time bomb. And so that was a big issue. And I also grew up in a home where there was some abuse. So I won't get too specific on that. It was mostly emotional, verbal, and there was some physical. But there was a part of me with this anger and with how outspoken I was, that I would put myself in these positions to call it out and say it was wrong, which is something that comes along with being on the spectrum a lot, where you might have overdeveloped sense of justice or, what's right and wrong. And, that puts you in the line of fire with an abuser sometimes, often actually. So that was a very difficult thing for me, on top of being, feeling like I was the black sheep. I actually became the black sheep. And the other thing too is that you sometimes feel like these people in your life, they're putting up with you or they're tolerating you. And so you probably put up with more abuse than you should, being on the spectrum, and anyone's capable of that. But I definitely felt like my hyper focus could be focused on people. And sometimes it was, or often it was, to my detriment. And this was in romantic relationships as well as relationships with my family. I'm just going to check to make sure we don't have any questions. We're still doing okay here. The biggest thing that I struggled with, and if you haven't been diagnosed, or if you've attempted to be diagnosed, therapists, they never really saw me for what I was. I was in a position where I was exceptional at masking. I didn't want them to know what I considered to be my flaws. I didn't want them to see me, so they didn't. I could tell them that I was anxious. I could tell them that I was depressed, but it was always very high level, like didn't get down into it. And so a lot of the time I would go once or twice and they would say, well, it doesn't seem like anything's really wrong with you. We can put you on medication. And I wasn't ready to do that. I had been on medication before at one point, and it made me very sick. So it wasn't until I was just overloaded, totally overwhelmed, that I was discovered. So what happened was I had a brand new therapist, and I was working for a nonprofit, and we had an event, and I was so overloaded because I have a tendency to just do everything. And I know from a lot of the questions that I got in the form that it sounds like a lot of you struggle with the same things, not having a balance in your life. And so I had just gotten to the point of meltdown, shut down, couldn't do it anymore. And it happened to be right at the same time I was going to see this therapist for the very first time. And I love my therapist. She's wonderful. I just found out that she is retiring, so that caused a little bit of a spiral. But we were talking and I was hyperventilating. I was having a panic attack. And she asked me some questions. And finally, I said the sentence that probably changed my life forever. And that was, I feel like I can fake anything. I can pretend to be anything. I can mimic anything. I'm really, really good at that. And so people often think that I am okay when I'm not okay, or that I'm good at things when I'm not good at things, and I'm just copying something else. So it just all felt like a big acting job all the time. And she asked me some more questions, which kind of led back to the whole hating the way clothes feel on my body. And for me, another way that manifests is if I feel like I'm overweight, my clothes are even more like I can't handle it. And the seatbelt, I cannot handle it. So we talked about that. And suddenly she asked me, have you ever considered that you might be on the spectrum? Which was mind-blowing to me, because in a way I had always felt really alien on the inside. And I had made comments to friends in high school, like, is there something you guys aren't telling me about myself? Like, I don't understand why this is so hard and why I am struggling so much to just be this person. And when I'm talking to people, why is it so painful? Because it seems like I'm doing okay in conversation, but on the inside, it just feels rancid. Like, my gosh, I'm looking into their eyes and I'm seeing all of these things that I've decided must be signs that they think I'm a weirdo, or, I'm trying not to make too much eye contact, but then I make too much eye contact. And it's just this, this weirdness. And so when she told me that, I kind of sat on it for a few weeks. I don't know that I really heard it at first, because as we'll talk about more, a lot of these ideas around autism, being on the spectrum, being neurodivergent, period, they're so outdated. And so I was a victim of the same stereotypes that I'm trying to break now. So what came after was kind of that denial period, not being sure, looking into getting an official diagnosis and finding out that it's near impossible when you're an adult, never mind when you're a female adult, because all of these studies were done on boys, young boys, and it presents differently. So I won't say that there is a gender to autism, just like there's not a gender to ADHD, but the presentations have skewed the data in the past. So it's 100% possible for a guy on the spectrum to have the same presentation as a woman, but that just makes them slip through the cracks more. So the presentation that we typically see in males are, obviously think like Sheldon Cooper, Big Bang Theory, like that's what we see. Or someone mentioned Rain Man today, which made me laugh because that's another presentation where it's this hyper focus, not being able to socialize appropriately. And I like to think that I'm actually pretty good at socializing with people, and that I have a pretty good sense of humor, and that I do show a depth of emotion. And in fact, sometimes I feel like I feel too much. So it was one of those things that I didn't end up subjecting myself to a formal diagnosis. I spoke with my therapist. She agreed. We went through the whole checklist, and I felt confident enough in my lived experience and in my struggle, and it lined up so well that I decided that's what I needed. So I don't think that a formal diagnosis is necessarily necessary. And in fact, I know some people who are related to me that tried to get a formal diagnosis. And the answer to that was, well, you can't be autistic because you're having a conversation with me right now, which makes me so angry. So if you feel it inside yourself, if this resonates with you, and that your experience speaks to that, and you do your research and you look into it, I think that's enough personally. So that's where I was at with that. I decided not to move forward and spend years of my time and thousands of dollars in money just for them to tell me what I already knew about myself. So immediately after, when I finally acknowledged all of this about myself and moved into that place of understanding that all of these traits that I'd struggled with for my whole life, executive dysfunction, not being able to make small talk or just kind of be chill at parties, all of this stuff came together into this picture for me. Then I started reading everything. And I've got a stack of books beside me that we'll talk about a little bit. But one of them was a memoir. I think it's this one. Nope, I'm a liar. I think it's this one. Odd Girl Out. Sorry, it's got a glare on it. My Extraordinary Autistic Life. So, oh gosh. When I was reading the memoir, one of the big things that came up for me was that this woman was married like I am. And I found out that only 9% of women on the spectrum, even though very few are diagnosed at this point, 9% are in married relationships. And on top of that, I found out that the statistics for mortality rates in people on the spectrum suicide is the top reason. And I think what I hated most about that information was that I understood why. And that still haunts me to this day to think about. I was looking at these statistics and they're saying autistic people or, I guess specifically autistic in this case, autistic people have a life expectancy of 10 to 30 years less than neurotypical people. And the top reason is suicide. And having been in a situation where a family member had committed suicide, there were several times as I was really, really struggling to come to terms with my identity that I was angry again about the fact that this person had taken my opportunity when I had seen how much it hurt my family and the people that I loved. And it felt like I was trapped, because I was living with this anxiety every day and this anger and this struggle to just fit in. It was so painful. And it's not easy all the time now, but it's definitely a lot more manageable. And even earlier this year, I was in a situation where I didn't know how much longer I had, and I wasn't even able to admit that until things got better. So, this is why all of this is so important to me and why I want to talk to you all, because I know that I'm not alone in this. I know that I have people who are close to me, people who are family struggling with the same things, where it's just like you're losing years of your life, you're losing months of your life. You don't know what you're doing with yourself because you're just so uncomfortable all the time. And that's no way to live. And so if there's anything that I can do to help people dig out of the hole that I was in, I'll do it. So we're going to move into the claiming of the identity, which is where things lighten up quite a bit and get better. Because it can get better. You don't have to live the way that you're living if you are miserable. When I finally decided to take control of my identity and lean into it, when I realized that telling people that I'm on the spectrum made my life so much easier, surprisingly, that was when things started to really get better, when it wasn't about other people, but it was about me. Because the way that we handle autism or neurodivergence is making ourselves more palatable to the people who are experiencing us and not making our experience more palatable. So from now on, I want you to think about how you can make your life easier, not other people's lives easier, because they don't necessarily have it right either. So the big thing for me was I finally decided that I was no longer going to try to hide it. So I told my mom, I told my mom thinking that she would tell my dad. She didn't tell my dad, which is a funny story, because we were in the car and he was talking about the neighbor who had an autistic son and how unfortunate that was. And when I tell you, I lost my mind. But we'll get to that when we get to personal relationships. I started being open about it because I wanted people to know what to expect. And, you've got boundaries. So you can set boundaries with people like, please don't do that. But you should also set expectations. It's one of those things where it's like, if you set them up to understand why you are a certain way, it helps the relationship overall. So when I tell my parents, when I go to their house now, because this was several years ago, when I say I need to have my own space and it needs to not be breached, or I need to go upstairs and put my headphones on and have a little bit of quiet time, they can understand that. Or if we have a conversation about, um, you know, where I'm sitting on the couch, even as simple as that, like I need to sit over here because it's most comfortable for me. I don't want to be touched. My mother's very affectionate. She loves to hug. She loves to literally lick my face if I let her. But there's had to be a conversation about that as well, where it's like, I'm not going to react well to that. So this is a boundary, but it's also an expectation that, if you do that, this is how I'm going to behave. So setting those expectations and boundaries are so important, and it can be very difficult, but the more you do it, you'll realize it's so helpful and it will grow your relationships. So another thing that I've had to do is discover my parts. So this was something really interesting that I loved that I did with my therapist. I told her at one point, I think I have lived multiple lives. I feel like I have multiple lives within this life. I feel like I've been a different person all throughout. And, you know, she brought up the concept of the inner child, which is something I've gotten to experience a lot this year, which has led to this identity that I've been able to claim, where you have your inner child and then you have different pieces of you at different traumatic points. So I had my inner child, I had my teenage self, I had the college flunky, and I had the queen, as we called her, and then there was just myself. The queen is a heartless bitch, and she has no, like, basically she will take care of everything. She's the most productive part of myself. But when things go south, I tend to act more that way. I'm less empathetic. I am less sympathetic. And I just drive through things. So the queen was handling a lot of my trauma, and she was coming out in that very angry way. And this is not to say I have multiple personalities. Everybody has these parts. And if you can identify them, you can also take advantage of their strengths. So the queen comes out when things are tough and she handles things. She puts her head down and gets through it. The flunky is the part of me that, had a lot of fun, but couldn't really take care of myself, kind of the more lighthearted part of myself that was going through those abusive relationships. And that experience is important to hold on to. So I have held on to that part of myself as well. You've got the teenage self and then the inner child. And recently, this is really funny. If you're familiar at all with Team Trash, they call me Mother. Recently, I've come to find a part of myself that I am calling Mother, this maternal part that is reparenting the internal child, or the internal child. And that has changed my life, because this figure inside of me that acts as the protector, the mother, gives me the opportunity to advocate for myself and also experience play in a way that I never had before. And that is such an important part of claiming your identity, because it's very likely, as a person on the spectrum, you've been faking so much of your identity for most of your life. And so you might not even know yourself. So having a safe space, a safe advocate, you can name them whatever. It can be mother. It could be just a random name that you give to this part of yourself that always stands up for you, and you can separate yourself from that. And they can give you the permission to be the person that takes care of you. Sorry, guys, I have so many notes. I maybe should have made this a little longer timing so we can get to the Q&A. But let's talk about overcoming, basically telling people. So there's really you're not going to like how anyone responds when you tell them. They'll either say, oh yeah, I thought there was something going on, which is of course not what you want to hear. Or they'll ask if you are joking, or they won't believe you, or they'll say everyone's a little autistic. There's a lot of different ways it can go. And so far, not a single one has been great initially, whether or not it's good-natured. But I have found many rewards in the long term after disclosure, with my parents especially. I actually had an experience today. It feels like it was just serendipitous. As I was putting together our resource list, I was sending things to my mom that I thought would help her understand me. And she actually sent me a text today letting me know that she watched the video twice. And so you guys will have access to that video. It'll be in some links that I send along after this session. But for the first time, she sort of understood, even though she didn't understand my lived experience. And, there's always the question from the people who love you, how can I support you? And it's difficult to explain that sometimes when you don't even know how to support yourself. And so there are a lot of resources that I'll pass on. And that'll be some of the things that I talk about quickly in the rest of our session. But it really, there is a reward in disclosing, and there is a freedom in it that you may not be experiencing now. And I'm here to tell you that the disclosure and the freedom that comes with it, even if you lose people, it's worth it. It's worth getting to the other side. And I wrote a little note over here too about this. The funniest thing about this journey for me is that when I fully committed to myself and this identity and seeking joy in this identity and advocating for myself, I found that a lot of my neurotypical friends and family started doing the same for themselves. And this summer, pretty much everybody I know was talking about joy, because that was all I could think about. It was all I was after. And you really see a change. I know a lot of people say misery loves company, but joy does too. So misconceptions. So like I said earlier, obviously a lot of us are victimized by the stereotypes that we are basically, let me check this really quick. So struggling here. A lot of us are victimized by the stereotypes that we are forced to live with and the things that we've seen on TV. Of course, autistic characters often don't represent the whole of autism, and certainly not in females. So, which I will just really quick answer this. What symptoms made it apparent that I was autistic? So basically, for me, it's a lot of sensory stuff like sounds, smells, things like that. I struggle with, I actually don't smell a lot of things, but then when I do have a sense of smell, it's overpowering and uncomfortable. And then with clothing, there was a point in time I was not able to wear pants for over a year. Luckily, that was in the era of LuLaRoe, so I was just wearing leggings constantly. So it's a lot of sensory stuff like that. Sometimes, even though I have a sense of humor, I can mistake jokes or intentions. So that's just kind of some of the stuff, but I'll also send along a document that'll have kind of the list of things that might be presenting. So, but coming back to breaking down these internalized myths, somebody had a really good question that they passed along to me about the idea of high functioning and low functioning autism. And recently, high functioning and low functioning have come out as being harmful for multiple reasons. And the best way I can think to explain that is that we shouldn't have any idea of high functioning and low functioning, because as a spectrum, it's actually a set of spectrums. So it's these different traits, and you might be high functioning on one part of the spectrum and low functioning on another, So for me, sometimes textures, I'm probably, or sounds, I'm on the low functioning side. But when it comes to being able to fake it till I make it, I'm probably more so on the high functioning side. So there's really no all encompassing word for someone who might, I guess, present like I do or present like you do, where it's not super Thank you. Thank you. High and low support needs is a good way to talk about that. But it doesn't necessarily encompass the person or a group of people so much as the individual. Would you agree with that person who said high and low support needs? Maybe. Wait on that one. Yeah, okay, cool. Yep. So really the only person who can define the high and low support needs, I would say, is probably the individual themselves. So let's see here. Professional life. I know that was a big one. I have a lot of people who are in publishing, which is unkind to both neurotypicals and neurodivergent people alike. It's so fun. What are we doing with our lives? When it comes to publishing, a really difficult part of that, I think, are the rules. Of course, we struggle with the rules already in just interacting with people, but when it comes to publishing, the etiquette doesn't really exist. There's all these kind of like whispers of rules and things that might be wrong to do, might not be wrong to do. Maybe you should do them, all of these things. So that can be really, really difficult. And the best way to deal with that is to gather a group around you that you can kind of talk these things through, or finding a mentor is a good way to do it, and not necessarily a mentor through a mentoring program, but just someone who's willing to walk you through it. And there are a lot of resources out there, but when in doubt, polite is always the best way to go. And I've been telling everybody not to personalize things, because I think personalizing queries is ridiculous and it never really helped with anything there. So if you're ever wondering, is this the right thing to do? In publishing, I think the best way to think about it is they are on an equal playing field with you, regardless of where they're at, even if they're an agent or a publisher. And if you make a mistake and it's not a harmful or unkind mistake and they're rude to you, you don't want to work with them anyway. And same in life. It's not your loss if people don't take the time to understand you and don't treat you well. So there are a lot of people in the world, and I'm lucky to have connected with a ton of people on Twitter and in publishing who are fantastic. So don't stress too much about that. And when it came to agents, of course, we had the question, should you self-identify to agents? That's totally up to you. If you're comfortable with that, absolutely feel free to do so, especially if it's own voices, but even then you don't have to be specific there. But it's really important that when you go into these situations, you have learned to advocate for yourself. So for me, that looked like emailing my agent before we signed and letting her know that I'm on the spectrum and that these are the things that she could expect from me. And these are my struggles. And these are my, basically skills. And here are the things that may be a little bit unexpected. Can you deal with that? And she was absolutely on board with that. And it's been wonderful. And those are the people you want to work with anyway. Do you really want to give your book to someone who sucks? Group chats are wonderful, but they can be overwhelming. So don't get into too many of those. But I do recommend finding like-minded people that you can work with and that you can trust. And then, of course, this applies to all professional life. Hyperfocus. So for me, hyperfocus is a big thing. I commit to a lot of things. I start a lot of projects and it can get out of control. And then I get stuck doing one thing for a long amount of time. And suddenly my neurotypical counterparts are like, what have you been doing all day? And it can be really harmful to productivity. And it can also be harmful to that was gross. Relaxation. So one thing that I really like, and this falls under self-care too, is I started doing this little thing. Yes, this is a cup of popsicle sticks. And on these popsicle sticks, I put tasks that if I have any time that I don't have something that I need to be doing, or I want to hyper focus on something, but I know I need to do something else, I can pull one of these popsicle sticks and it will tell me what to do and an amount of time to do it. So you allot of the time. This one says work on a social media post, or you can also put self-care things in here. That one's 30-minute writing sprint, choose a room to vacuum, research something you don't know. I know that there's probably things in here too, like, oh, this is a good one. Make 2 phone calls you've avoided. So you can put things in there that you can commit to doing that task. And that has worked really well for me. But with self-care too, you know, if I see something in here, it's like, go watch TV for an hour. And I then, you know, I have to do what's on the popsicle stick. The popsicle stick knows what it's talking about. So that's a great way that you can use that both in your professional and in your personal life. It's something that, a little blurry there, something that can help you make those decisions and commit to things. Another great tool for your professional life are planners. Obviously, there are all different kinds. I have multiple. This one is the I Am planner, and this one is specifically for neurodivergent brains. How far back do I have to go? See that? So it's just set up a little bit differently. It doesn't have dates on it, so you can add the date. So if you forget to do this, your planner is not ruined at that point. So, and it has things that you might want to remember. So for me, a big one is medication. I forget to take my pills every single day. Drinking water, different things like that. So this is a great thing, and it gives you a brain dump space, which I always love. And then your priorities for the day, so you know what you're looking for. So this is a really awesome planner. It's the I Am planner. It can just sit on your desk, and you can use it as needed. When it comes to communicating with peers and authority figures in general, polite is always the way to go. At this point, I just fully disclose that I'm on the spectrum and that sometimes I don't have total control of my tone, and I'm losing my voice a little bit right now, which is really important to disclose because I have been in several relationships where people think I'm condescending, and it's not at all the intention. It's just how I sound, or if they catch me off guard with a question, I respond too quickly and I don't pay attention to how I'm coming off. And I know that some people, obviously I have a question here about resting processing face. Exactly. I have a question here about eye contact. Of course, you know, if I feel like I can do it, I'll do it, but I let people know that too, that eye contact makes me uncomfortable, especially because sometimes I make too much eye contact. So it's one of those things, just letting people know about this part of yourself, and they can honestly, their opinions are not your problem. They're not your problem. They're not your responsibility. And all you can do is show them what an awesome person you are and the skills that you do have, and they can learn how to respect you. So it's one of those things where I think, at least in my experience so far, I've found that people really follow along. They just, in the end, get it, you know? It's not, and if they don't, then again, it doesn't feel like any kind of loss to me, because there are a ton of people who will understand and who will accommodate you if you accommodate yourself first. When it comes to personal life, there's of course your spouse, your family, and your friends. They are not exempt from things in terms of when you tell them that you're on the spectrum, do they believe it? How do they react? Like, it's still never quite fun, but it will make a difference in your life that's worthwhile. And you know, with my husband, it was not a struggle, but it was a learning process, because we were married before. Let me make sure that I done. We were married before I got diagnosed. And so we had a lot of problems that were related to me being on the spectrum that we didn't address because we didn't know. And so that information actually made my relationship so much better because we were able to talk about it, where it's like, we're having this fight and I need you to know that I don't understand. And I probably wouldn't have felt as comfortable saying that or even understood that there was a miscommunication happening if I didn't know that he was neurotypical and I am not. So that really opened things up with my spouse as well as with my friends and family. We didn't have less miscommunication, but we were able to identify it as a miscommunication and get to the root of it without anger, which was a huge change. And it felt so much better to live that way. There was something else I was going to say about that. I don't remember. Apparently my notes aren't as good as I thought, even though they are very long. So does anyone have any questions on that section on specific to communicating with friends, family, spouse, boss, all that fun stuff before we move into self-care and play? I'm not going to be able to talk after this. No questions. Okay. So moving into self-care, play, and shameless joy, as I call it. One of the big things that is really important to me these days is joy and play. And that was something that, like I said earlier, I didn't have a lot of growing up or even really until the last year. And I noticed it for the first time when I was walking the dogs and I decided to sit in the dirt, which is not something that I usually would do. And I was just sitting there digging for rocks and enjoying rocks. And now my office is full of rocks and I will sit there and literally scrub my rocks. I will identify them. And that is a form of play for me, but also, getting down on the floor with the dogs and stuff like that, or hiking now. Hated the outdoors. I hated it, you guys. But once I decided that I was going to accommodate myself, which meant having prescription sunglasses because I need them to see, but also the sun hurts my eyes all the time, or being able to decide when I'm done being outside. A lot of the time, when you go with people, everybody has their own ideas and your ideas and your comfort may be different. And so accommodating that and starting out in those situations by letting everybody know exactly how this might go, that you might be done a lot sooner than everybody else, sets you up to be in a position that you can leave and people understand. I always like to take my own car to things because I don't want to get stuck anywhere, and that helps with my anxiety. When it comes to self-care, I think that there's a really big, the definition is wrong, in my opinion. It doesn't look like going to get your nails done or going to the spa or things like that. A few people ask me about organization, and I consider staying organized in an act of self-care. Not that you would be able to tell from my office right now, but I like to, again, think of myself in parts where if I were to look at my golden retriever, Truman, he's not a part of me, but he is kind of. I love him so much, and I want to make sure that he's taken care of and that he's clean and that he is healthy. And can I apply that to myself? So, again, we're looking at the situation where you are being on the spectrum. Most of the time, we're pretty good actors. We're able to mimic things. We're able to pretend pretty well. We have no lack of imagination or really taking in patterns. So if I can look at myself as someone that I love as much as I love my dog, can I do more self-care activities like put away my laundry or make sure I have accessible food in the house for when I decide that I don't want to cook and everything sounds disgusting, so I have to make a bowl of popcorn and cheese. Am I exercising? Because that can help with a lot of the anxiety, even though I really don't want to do it. There are also, medications for sensory problems. If you're struggling, they do have some medications that can help kind of dull things that are too heightened, or for anxiety. One of the big things that I have experienced, and we're at our hour, but I'm going to keep going. So if you guys want to hang out with me, please do. We'll still do the Q&A. But there are a lot of stigmas around medications that I had to come to terms with this year. And so if that's something that, you are considering, definitely look into it, because medication made a huge change for me in my life and being able to access my joy. So there's nothing wrong with it. And especially if you're in a position like I was, where I felt like I was not going to survive much longer, there's no shame in that. When it comes to executive dysfunction, again, this is fabulous. If you feel like you have items that you either forget or you just don't want to do, for me, a big part of the executive dysfunction is just committing to something. And I know that might not be the case for everyone. So if you have some smaller tasks that you can put on here, and you can just pull one of these and you say, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to do this one thing. That can really help with that. Back to play. We're almost to the end here. A lot of our behaviors as neurodivergent people have been shamed, and not maliciously all the time, but that can take away our ability to play. And so if you're looking for something in terms of self-care and relaxation, think of something that you've always wanted to try, or something that you want to do. For me, it's been crafting recently. So I've been doing a lot of paper mache, which can get very messy. I've been doing a lot of bookmark making, things like that. And those things really get me outside of my head and allow me to just sort of experience without all of the constant thought in my head. And you'll find that some of these things feel like playing. And when you learn to play like that by yourself, you can also learn how to play nicely with others, which can be really fulfilling and fun. And that's been a huge change for me, in that now when I hang out with my friends or with my family, my parents and I went and picked up shells on the beach, which is not something I've ever done with my family. And that was a form of play, and probably one of the best experiences that I've had with my parents. And that happened a month ago. Finally, the biggest thing that I hope you got from this talk is basically, you need to understand your patterns, and I hope that you feel open to explaining them to others, because there's nothing wrong with them. They have different functions and they serve you. And so if they're serving you, they're not harming you. You need to honor that, and you need to make them a priority. And you need to advocate for yourself. And if you need somebody to help you advocate, find someone you trust, and, let them be the voice in your head. It's all about just accommodating and learning to take care of yourself and accept yourself and forgive yourself, even though you don't have to be forgiven for anything. So I know that was a very, very long-winded talk, and I don't even know that I addressed everything or that it made sense, but we'll open it up to Q&A. Again, remember, I can see your name unless you check anonymous. So make sure you're checking anonymous so you don't get exposed in there. Or you can just put it in the chat to host and panelists, because only I will see it. I'll wait a couple minutes, take a little drink. Questions? Did everybody fall asleep? Well, while we wait to see if there are any questions that come through, I am going to send, along with this recording, a list of resources. So these are different books, fidget toys, videos, stuff like that, all the fun stuff that you can access. You got a question? Yes. Do you ever feel like you're backsliding? And if so, how do you deal with that? So this is a very good question, especially for right now, because during the holidays, I felt a major backslide, and to the point where I almost felt like, can I even teach this? Can I even speak at this session? Like, am I sure I even know what I'm talking about? No, never. But it's a situation where for the first time in my life, I felt capable of communicating to my husband and to my family and saying, hey, I'm in this position right now and I'm having a really hard time of it and I'm shutting down, which is something that has happened throughout my life. My mom always likes to joke that I'll just disappear when I'm done in a social situation. I just go somewhere. But it was scary, like watching it happen to me this time. And I just had to basically relax into it. It's akin to relaxing in a bathtub full of water and your face is going underwater. But the thing is that once I did, I relaxed and I went into that self-care mode. I found that I recovered from the shutdown faster, and I recovered from the problems in my head a lot faster, and I just felt better overall, and I'm starting to come out of it. So again, it just comes down to both disclosing and accepting yourself. If I hope that answers the question. Let's see. How do you decide what is reasonable behavior from neurotypical people and where to set boundaries when it feels like they don't get you? Have you ever ended a relationship based on needing to protect yourself? So it really just depends on you and what you're willing to accept. I tend to be a bridge burner myself. So a really good example of this here, it would be my grandparents. My grandfather was extremely emotionally abusive, and it just not good to be around, and someone that you could never ask to apologize, or who would never meet you where you're at. I think the biggest thing for me when it comes to identifying someone that I want to keep in my life is the biggest thing, I'm sorry, the biggest thing that I ask myself is, can this person grow? Or am I just hoping they can grow? You know, is this someone that I have experienced change with before? You know, because it is tough. There are things that people don't understand. And there are certainly plenty of things about neurotypicals that I don't understand. And so, but I'm willing to learn. So I think it's a willingness to learn and not being abusive. But yes, I have ended plenty of relationships based on needing to protect myself. And I think that's very important. And it's very difficult. I won't lie. It's hard. I felt very guilty for a long time. So that's definitely something that has happened and does happen. And I think it's important. Do you wish you were diagnosed as a child? Do you think it would have helped you then? Honestly, no. The one thing that I do wish I had had was a better understanding of myself, but that's really it. I don't think that there was the support that would have really helped me. I mean, maybe doctors or whatever, but honestly, at this point, I don't even feel like doctors have been much help beyond my therapist. You know, when I went to go get my medication for the ADD, ADHD, they just took basically her word for it, that it was a thing. And that was easy to do. But it's like, for the most part, I just feel like I am a whole person as I am now, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know that I would really want things to be different. Although I do wish I could go back and comfort myself during those years. So, and sometimes, you know, if you're working with that internal child, you can do that. You can talk to that part of yourself and try to heal some of those wounds. So let's see here. Oof, I meant that to be anonymous. Oh, well. I don't see who that was, so it's no worries. Let's see over here. Any tips on what to look for in a therapist, how to find others like mine that I've been happy with? So it is really difficult to find a good therapist. And it really does depend on you. I like tough love. My therapist said the word fuck in our first appointment, and I loved her from that moment on. And so I just really like honesty. So it's more of a vibe than anything. But the best way, I think, to find someone is to ask people around you. If you have friends that live nearby, ask them if they know anybody. Just kind of put it out there that you're looking and what you're looking for. That's how I found my therapist, was that I let a friend know that I was having a really hard time finding one and that I didn't like the ones that I had before, and what my expectations were. And it ended up being wonderful. And actually, I'll do a little plug here. My therapist is wonderful, and she wrote this book, The Butterfly Killer. I don't know if you can see that. How to Identify and Manage a Narcissist. So this is from her experience being a therapist for a long time. And she's fabulous. So this will be linked. I'll link that in there as well. And there's definitely a lot of information about clients who might be on the spectrum. I'm sure I'm in there. I haven't identified myself yet, but I have I've questioned her and told her I was looking. So, but she talks a lot about, these positions that a lot of people on the spectrum get put in because of narcissism. How do you date while autistic? Every time I try to go out with someone, I'm on turbo masking mode to the point that the person isn't talking to the real me. And I'm paranoid about being manipulated, taken advantage of by people like I have been in the past. Yeah, absolutely. That's, this is an interesting question because I was definitely still in masking mode when I met my husband. But I was also in a period of my life, I'm also celiac. So I was really sick at the time. So I basically shit my pants in front of him. And it's really hard to mask when you're pooping your pants. So nothing else is really more embarrassing than that. We also kind of knew each other a little bit before then. So it's a little bit of a different dating economy these days. If you're looking at, the websites and stuff like that, meeting people that way. But again, I think just disclosure and showing up and just saying, hey, I'm on the spectrum, I'm autistic, and letting it go from there. And then once they know, I don't know, I feel like I'm a lot more myself once people know about me, because I feel like they understand it better and they're not wondering what's wrong with me, and like coming up with all of these ideas of their own, like they know. So I don't know if that helps. I haven't dated in a long time. I'm sorry. I'll just tell my husband I have to go on a date now for research. Can you share tips about how you manage anxiety? Yes, absolutely. So I like fidget things, but one of my favorite things are these worry stones. This one is amethyst, if you can see it. This is really nice to play with, and it actually stimulates nerves in your thumb that create, I believe it's endorphins. I don't know. I'm a writer, you guys. But other than that, I actually really like to do things that get me out of my head. So like, I like to play video games. I don't play video games very often, but when I'm feeling anxious, that's a good place for me to go. I also work a lot with mantras. So I don't know about you guys, but I tend to be very repetitive in my thoughts. And so the things that are causing me anxiety, oh, that's a dog bark. The things that are causing me anxiety oftentimes repeat themselves in my head. So it's just over and over a sentence of anxiety. And so what I do is I take that sentence and I change it, because if I can make one sentence repeat itself, then I can make another sentence repeat itself. So I am enough, I am enough, I am enough, or I am safe, I am safe, I am safe. And you can kind of just change that, and you just let it keep repeating itself until it kind of goes away. And that doesn't always work. I definitely deal with panic attacks sometimes that I can't overcome. But for the most part, these mantras and these affirmations are really helpful. And giving them something physical can also help with that, because it's a good reminder. Someone else mentioned tapping, which I have heard of. I haven't done that myself so much. Like I did it with EMDR like this, which kind of mimics REM sleep. I know that there are different types of tapping too. So I'm not super familiar with that, but it's definitely something that I've heard people talk about. Let's see, how do you feel like autism and ADHD interact in yourself? I honestly don't know which is which half the time. I've found that since I've gotten medicated, I'm on a really low dose of Adderall. I can actually complete tasks that I wasn't able to complete before, where I would kind of just start things and leave them. But I've also heard that sensory things can be ADHD, and I've heard, they're very close to each other. They're very similar in some ways. And I think we're seeing that more and more. And I really liked, some people have been saying, neurodivergence, it's such a broad spectrum, for lack of a better word, that of course we're going to find these points of similarities in so many of these disorders and brain wiring types. So I can't really say in terms of that, like how I feel they necessarily interact, because it's just me, but I don't know if that's helpful. Anything else? Thanks for hanging out with me this long, guys. I know we went a bit over. And if you have any questions that you think of, please feel free to email me. You should have my email from that link that I sent, but I'll also send another email with all those resources and with this recording later on. Countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm gonna call it. But thank you guys. Oh, yeah, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and for you hanging out with me this long. I hope that there was something that helped you in this session. And of course, if there's anything I can do to help support you, or if there are any future sessions that I can do, I'm happy to do that. And then you guys will get some TED Talks that are a lot more, what's the word? Eloquent, succinct. So hopefully that'll help too. Yes, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Happy Saturday, or no, it's Sunday. Oh my gosh, no, it's Monday tomorrow. Ooh. Oh, yeah, we already lost. Let's see. Yep. Okay. All right, I'm gonna end it.